And we can pull up the agenda whenever you're ready. So.
All righty. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Salem High School Building Committee meeting on Thursday, February 13th. I'm sorry. Just a quick note, the mayor will not be joining us today. He's a little bit under the weather, but he may be listening in. And the superintendent, while not here yet, will be arriving shortly. We do have a quorum, which is good. And so we appreciate everybody taking the time to log into the Zoom. This was originally scheduled as an in-person meeting, but not really knowing what the weather was going to be, we decided to change it to Zoom for safety purposes. So we're glad you all could make it. I'm going to kick it off by looking for a motion to approve the minutes of the January 16th meeting.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
I need a second.
Second.
Any questions, comments, changes?
Or can you take it down for just a second? Because I just want to do a show of hands.
All those in favor?
On a remote meeting, don't all votes need to be roll call votes?
You can do a roll call vote.
They do, yeah.
I think I'm right about that.
Okay.
You are, yep.
Okay.
Deborah, do you have the list? Could you call the roll?
I could. And if I forget anybody that I didn't see, just let me know. Z?
Here.
Nate?
Yes.
Beth Ann?
Yes.
Anthony?
Yes.
Neil?
Yes, sorry.
Yep. Matt?
Yes.
Anna?
I think I'm a voting member. I don't live
Oh,
in.
I forget that we're not calling non-voting members, so I apologize about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm not either.
I know, Neil. That's why you hesitated. I caught that then. Sorry. Lisa? No, not Lisa. Jenna?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Lori?
Yes.
Paul? Perla?
Yes.
Betsy?
Yes.
Keith?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
I think I got everybody who's a voting member in on
To
that.
confirm, is there a voting member who has not been called upon?
It's the mayor. I vote yes. Sorry.
Oh.
Oh.
I'm not going to be able to contribute much because I've lost my voice.
Okay.
Apologies.
And Glenn
I see-
Barn. And
I see Meg just joined us. And
Glenn,
Beth Ann.
there you are. Thank you, Glenn. I didn't see you. Thank you.
Megan, you had your hand up. Are you all set, or did you have something you wanted to say?
Who's that?
Megan had her hand up earlier. Megan, it went down, so I'm guessing you're
Okay.
good. Okay, you're good. All right, so Sabrina, could you add Stephen Messinger, who's on the
Hold on,
Perkins and
before you,
Will
I'm
team?
sorry, just to make this
Sorry.
official.
Yeah, no,
Margaret,
I
before you make it official, I need to ask all those who oppose, just to make sure we're official there. Anyone oppose the minutes? Okay, thanks. Motion carries. Sorry, go ahead.
Sabrina, could you add Stephen Messinger so he has control as well for presenting, and then we'll get the presentation started. So Brooke, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so you are probably going to be really sick of this diagram by the time we're done, but this is that kind of overview of where we are. So we're in third week of February. We have a meeting, the same meeting in 2 weeks after school vacation, to ask this group to authorize the submission of what's called the preliminary design program, which is the phase that we're in, to the MSBA. And then we will be launching into the preferred schematic report. What that really means, the translation is that in this meeting and the next meeting, we will be finalizing the options that are going to be studied in the preferred schematic phase. And we are also going to be collecting together and providing what I call all the due diligence, that is the representation of the information that's been collected by the design team. So next slide, Brooke, if we could. So this is, again, this is my kind of overview slide of the different processes. So you'll see up at the top, I've highlighted on the first two lines the building committee meetings we have. So we have tonight, we have the 27th, and then we have a meeting March 20th. So tonight we're going to be looking at very broadly at the preliminary design program content. On the 27th, we'll be voting to authorize it. And on March 20th, we're going to be launching into a meeting with this that is about the next phase. And we're going to include on that agenda a discussion of the delivery options, because the committee will need to take up fairly soon the question of whether they want to pursue a general contractor or construction manager at risk process. So not for tonight, but just to sort of tell you that's out there about a month away. The design team has been cranking away. There's a huge amount of stuff to look at tonight. The school committee met on, let's see, it was the 3rd, I believe. Yes, February 3rd. And we're going to get a quick update from Beth Ann Cornell. But as I think you heard, the mayor, I believe, sent a notice to everybody saying that the school committee had voted to stick with the 9-12 grade configuration for the project. And they will be looking on February 24th, the Monday after the vacation, at the ed program draft. The other thing I want to note on the community input line, we have put a pin and a date for a sustainability summit. We'll talk a little bit about what that is in the process of the presentation. And around that time, we're going to be going back out to the public to share the options that have been settled on that are going to be studied. And then we'll need to do the same thing as we come to the end of May to look in more detail at where it looks like the project is headed. So I think that's all I'm going to say about that, unless there are any questions. All right. So Brooke's going to say a little bit about the Sustainability Summit goals.
Right now, we're targeting March 6th. We have collected our consultants to participate, as well as a subcommittee to participate, because really it's about the voices of Salem and your expectations and desires around your sustainability goals. I don't know, do you want to get into some more detail, Margaret, or?
To be honest, I would like to circle back to that. I think what we should probably do, just because there's so much stuff to look at tonight, I think I'd like to go through the material, and at the end, when we revisit the meeting slide, why don't we come back if there's time and talk about what would be the content of the Sustainability Summit. But the goal is to have the kind of broad-reaching meeting we've talked about, to talk about all the aspects of sustainability that need to inform the project.
That would be great, sure.
All right, school committee update. Beth Ann, do you want to, as someone, I was not able to attend the school committee meeting in person or online. Do you want to say a few words about the meeting on the 3rd?
Sure. I just wanted to update everybody because I did mention to this group a few times that we had taken a straw poll, and the members, with the exception of one, all sort of came back and said that we would end up voting for a 9 through 12. And so I just want to explain I'm sorry, the 7 through 12. So I just wanted to name that we did not, and I'm sure that was surprising to folks. But we arrived there after Margaret did a little back of the envelope estimating for us about what the cost difference would be between, coming to our community with a 7 to 12 versus 9 to 12. And I think the mayor shared this perspective, and I think we all really understood it as elected officials and people who have a responsibility to our community, that we really couldn't ask our community to take on that kind of financial burden. And there were also a lot of really good feedback from community members, particularly teachers, around you know, they were really more in favor of a 9 through 12, our middle school teachers in particular. So there are good academic reasons and good community reasons for us to vote for the 9 through 12. But ultimately, I think what really swayed all of us was the financial burden that it would have put on the city. So I just wanted to explain to folks how we got there.
Thanks, Beth Ann. Does anybody have any questions on that? Because I am actually going to share now the back of the envelope that I shared with the mayor and the superintendent a few weeks ago. Any other questions, or you want to see the numbers? Okay, so let's go to the numbers.
Matt has a question.
Oh, Matt.
Yeah, I guess just because I'm suspect will be asked, right? Is
Matt, are you
the-
frozen? Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
I gotcha.
Okay. I guess my question, because I'm guessing will be asked, is obviously it's less cost because you're not building a middle school right now. However, that school is not going to last forever and will need to be upgraded at some point. Was that included in the analysis?
I think we had a conversation about Collins in particular, and Collins was a really sound building. It's really in very good shape, and is school committee member Mary Manning, who was the principal of Collins for a long time, highlighted for everybody is that school really was designed to function as a middle school, and so it really accommodates right now our students quite well. I mean, we do need to upgrade stuff like the gym and probably the theater, but overall it's probably one of our most sound buildings, and we know that from the buildings assessment report that we got a few years ago.
Yeah, Anna, I think you may know, I think you know more of the detail about this than I do, but I think there's also an issue that we found associated with Collins, that there is still debt from the last project that's associated with the building, which would also have made it more difficult to make this, just from a fiscal perspective, to fold this in. Have I got that right, Anna?
I think so. I forgot to pull that up in advance of this meeting, but I believe that we're still paying down some debt, but I can, yeah.
So I've got the sequence a little we're a lot of sequence here, because I think the next thing we wanted to do was to talk about what's in the preliminary design program. So let's do this and then we'll switch to the numbers. So, you know, again, back to the beginning, there's this pretty long list. You know, I call it the due diligence submission. There's just a lot of documentation that is the basis of the next steps in the project. And what we are planning to do, the consultant team is planning to do, is to create a shared folder that we can put this material into for you next week. And we will send it out and ask that you review it. We will not have time in the meeting on the 27th to scroll through every page, but we want to encourage folks to look at it, let us know if you have questions, and then the meeting on the 27th can really focus on the further development of the options, which is kind of the core next step that comes out of this phase. So, Brooke, do you want to add anything about any of these particular items?
I think, yeah, we'll get to some of these as we go through the presentation. We are also have scheduled, I think on the 25th, our consultants to do an existing condition video, and that's the primary consultants relative to understanding existing conditions. So that's traffic, civil, landscape, architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection. So we will be recording an existing condition, so you don't have to listen to it on this meeting and take up the time, and you can watch it at your convenience. Other than that, we are working through all of these parts, and as Margaret said, it will be in a shared link. We'll generally title the folders, they'll relate to these names. So you'll go into the existing condition folder, and you'll find all of those reports. And feel free to look at them and ask questions. So that's how we're going to set this up.
Okay. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the information I shared with Dominic, the superintendent, with Anna and Nate and Rick a couple of weeks ago. So you will remember that in our last meeting, which was on January 16th, the design team had been cranking through documenting the space requirements for the building. It's a high school like this one is actually a really tricky piece of work to sort of generate those values because of the CTE space. And the CTE space is also one of the kind of most unique aspects about Salem's program, and clearly one of the most successful. They had started to get a handle on the number. It was a pretty big area. And the middle school, by comparison, is quite an easy number to get a handle on. So what you see here at the top is what I shared with that group that is the likely delta between a high school project and a 912 project and a 712 project. So the reason this is relatively easy to calculate is the MSBA, for the purposes of new construction, tells us what they consider the allowable area per student for a middle school project. So here you have the number of students that was agreed upon in the MSBA enrollment structure was 500. The area that the MSBA will reimburse on for square footage is 181. That gives us a middle school, let's call it a wing, right? A middle school wing of the building that is a little over 90,000 square feet. And current construction costs projected out to when we will be doing the building are around $1,000 a square foot, which is a shocking number, but I'm going to talk a little bit in the next slide about comparable projects. So if you take the area that the MSBA will reimburse on 1,000 square feet, you have a $90 million middle school wing, if you will. And then if you add 25%, which is a kind of recommended rule of thumb at this level for what are called soft costs, which are fees, contingencies, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, you're talking about a delta of well over $100 million for the middle school piece alone. So this was the information that I shared shortly after the last meeting. I think the mayor's take on it immediately was what Beth Ann described earlier. And so that was what the school committee took up on the 3rd. I'm gonna, on the next page, which I don't want to go to yet, but on the next page, well, let's go back. So when we think about, one thing I want everybody to keep in mind as we're sort of moving through this is that there are 4 big items which impact cost of projects and in the order of their impact. So building area is the biggest one. You can imagine if you're building buildings and they're costing on average $1,000 a square foot, that the building area is a key driver. The second is project duration, and you're going to see this in the information that Perkins and Will presents, because they're going to show us options, some of which are single phase projects and some of which are multi-phase projects. So that's an important component of this that we're starting to dive into. There's the extent and complexity of the site work, and then there's the market. So right now, Brooke and I met with their chief estimator earlier today. And, you know, for instance, right now, Peter was telling us the bids they have been seeing recently on schools have been very, very good that there's been a turn in the market, but at the same time, it sort of in the right direction for us, right? The bids are more aggressive and are coming in lower than estimated. But in the meantime, we have a lot of challenges in the current environment that are resulting in unpredictable costs. So those are all the things that we are thinking of as we do this. So I'm going to talk about the next slide, and then I'm going to check and see if folks have questions. So this data, I want to say this is not my data, but it's great data. Some of you may be aware that there's a high school project going on in Lexington. And so this data was collected and assembled by the folks who, the owner's project manager who's working on the Lexington project. And what it shows is 5 actually comparable projects, only one of which, the Lexington project, is really kind of going for the level of sustainability that we're talking about here. But in general, you can see that all of these high school projects, which are all, by the way, I guess Belmont is probably the standout here because it was 712. The other 4 are 912 projects. They're all sort of generally the same square footage. And if you go down to the bottom line, you'll see that the differences between them mostly tie to when they were built. So Lexington is the most recent project, so it's got the highest cost per square foot. But they're all sort of in this neighborhood of thousands of dollars a square foot. So you can see that on the escalated project cost number, although their escalated project cost is also rolling in soft costs. So Brooke, let's take this down for a second. I want to see what questions folks may have about this. Or is everybody in shock? Which is another option.
Beth Ann has her hand up.
I don't
Ann.
have a question. I don't have a question. I just checked my notes, and I wanted to also mention, when folks are talking to people about this in the community, that one thing that did come up for us was that when you move to a 7 to 12 structure, it puts you in a different accountability category with the state. And so we thought a lot about that. So, you know, schools like Arlington are 7 to 12s, and we are demographically completely different from a school like Arlington. So it would put us in this sort of assessment category where we were being compared against schools that don't really look like us in any other way, except for the fact that they were 7 to 12. So that was a really important consideration for us when we were having these conversations. And that's something that member Amanda Campbell brought up. She's an educator in Lynn, and I think that was really important for all of us to consider. So I just wanted to mention that because I had left that out.
No, I think that's a really important thing to mention. And we put together, Brooke and I put together a list of all the 7 through 12 schools in the state, and that definitely popped out. Jenna, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, just more comment, and I appreciate you kind of laying out some of those, you know, similar features, particularly around sustainability. But I do think it's important for, you know, this committee and I know the design team that these don't always have to go more. Certainly an all electric facility doesn't have to be more expensive than one with full ductwork and plumbing and heating and all of those other things. So, but that's all about like us making early decisions that are smart, not just adding in features later on. And things like the PV and things could be put off on a different books. They could be a third-party agreement or some other means, right? So I think I just want to make sure that we don't think that just because of these sustainability features always add costs. But I do appreciate that you did that comparison so we could see how honestly, it all plays out.
I wish I had done the comparison. I want to stress, like, I was very glad to find that data because it was exactly what I would have created if I had the time. So, but yes, Jenna, exactly, point taken. I think Lexington is a good one to look at because they have all the same goals that you do. And I think benchmarking against what they're doing, they're kind of on the same timeline as us, but and recognizing that Salem and Lexington are two very different communities. To go back to my comment, what really drives these buildings is area and those other items that I mentioned. So, any other questions about all of that? It's context. Neil.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I haven't followed the school committee conversations or this more generally, and I'm just wondering if part of this decision there have been conversations about the grade configurations and what may be or may not be happening with the other school buildings, and like the extent of that. And how much that may be part of what we talk about. I know we're dealing with one school building, but I am just sort of thinking big picture about all the buildings and all of the needs, and also our decarbonization goals and swing spaces and all those types of things, and just wondering about some of that.
So go ahead,
I'm
Beth
sorry. I
Ann.
was gonna
I
just
think this is on you. I was going to add something, but you go ahead.
uh, we've known for about even before we got the go ahead for the high school building that we really need to rethink the way that we use our buildings. We have more buildings than we need. And one of them is infamously in a kind of environmental disaster zone over by Bentley. Not all of our buildings are in bad shape, but they certainly need some attention. Bentley would be one of those buildings. So, um, you know, I think we've got a long road ahead of us here in the next year, really trying to think about how to be responsible with our money, but also responsibility with our space. So, and much of that is addressed in the I always forget what that report's called about the buildings. Margaret, can you help me? What is called?
Master plan, your master plan
Thank you.
document.
The master plan document is really helpful. We really take a lot of that into consideration. So that said, none of that really went into conversations that we had either at our retreat or in our school committee meetings. We have talked about it in the past, but we're going to have conversations about how we use Collins, because it's much bigger than the student population that we have right now. And we have other populations where we're renting space for that we really shouldn't be, because we've got so much space of our own. So I'm not sure that really answers your question, Neil, but it didn't really factor into the vote per se.
So the thing I'll add to that is that the Perkins and Will have created a dashboard, which you all haven't seen so much, but the building committee got a really great view of when they had their retreat, which allows them to kind of see and potentially manipulate sort of different options of what to use them. So I think there's the beginning of a really good tool now that this decision is kind of in the rearview mirror, that they can use to kind of explore this question that you're asking, Neil, further. So I expect that's going to happen in parallel as we proceed with this project. Okay, any other hands before we go on to our next step here? Okay. Brooke, can you bring back the okay, so let's go on to the next step. Okay, so I think this is, Brooke, do you want to tackle this, or does Paul want to speak to this?
I think Paul really wanted to speak to it, right, Paul?
Yes, I did. Thank you. A couple of emails went out requesting sort of what was termed as non-negotiables, things that the members of the committee really wanted to see rise to the top of the needs and the goals for the project. So I lumped a few of them together. I mean, you can imagine there was a variety of comments, but these sort of rose to the top. So obviously sustainability and resiliency was mentioned by almost all of the people who responded. Cost control as well, operating costs, costs about I think how to make sure that the value of the spaces that are desired, which was the design part, was also delivered at a reasonably controlled cost to the community. Safety, the safety of buildings, school safety, and site safety also rose to the top. CTE integration, we've heard that many times through many meetings, so that was really an important part from most of the respondents. And the idea of design that spanned from high quality spaces to really good design with a big D, which capital D, which is having a building that we can all be proud of and that sort of resonates with the community, but also is designed in a way to draw attention to the commitment that the community has invested in while being cost controlled. And then fields and site and wayfinding, that was the most of the variety of things, people coming to the site, whether it be parents picking up children after school or visitors to the site for game day or any other kinds of things that would solve what is now a very difficult path around the school. So we have compiled all of the comments that came in. I would invite people who didn't respond, if they want to continue to respond, they can send me the email. I'll add it to the list, the Word document, and so this was the summary of it.
Great. Okay, any comments, questions about that? All righty, so back to the drivers. So we don't have, I think Steve has not been able to join yet, but I'll speak for him to say that he and his team have been really plowing ahead with creating the educational program, which is a narrative which supports the space summary. The Perkins and Will, in partnership with Kim Carter and the folks in the district, have been studiously working on the space summary, which again, building area drives project cost is critical. And Brooke is going to say a few words about the space summary and where we are. I do just want to say that this is very much still a work in progress. We've learned a lot about the program. It is complicated and the curriculum is rich, and we're still trying to get a handle on everything. So Brooke, take it away.
Yes, I would concur with that. We have made a lot of progress since the last meeting. We have reduced some square footage, especially in the CT areas where we had about a 3-hour visit with Mario, and we were able to speak to many of the CTE faculty members. And so we could better size those CTE spaces. And in many cases, like I said, they went down, which reduced the total square footage, the gross square footage. So the current program that we have right now is tracking about 415,000 square feet. However, we put a range because we're still waiting to get some feedback from some people and get the blessing on everything we've documented so far. We do have a renovation only option, which almost fits in the existing building, but it would be pretty extensive. And the other options right now are conforming to this square footage. So it's really where we are. We hope by the end of next week, we'll be able to put a draft in your folder. And we're reluctant to do it right now because we do want to get some more information on some of the spaces. Does anybody have any questions? Jenna?
Yeah, just a quick question. I see it says not including auto. Are you including a new auto, or are you kind of thinking of that separate?
No,
in
no.
your, okay.
Thank you for
So the
asking.
auto Salerno would be just stay on its own.
This is just saying that the existing building is
Uh-huh.
411,000 square feet. If you include auto, you add to that, because it's a separate building. It's not talking about, there's no correlation between that and what our proposals are, because all of our proposals include auto within the building.
Oh,
itself.
okay.
Right. It's just
Okay, great.
a weird thing that there's a separate building, so we wanted to isolate that square footage. So thank you for asking. Anybody else?
I just want to add, Rick and Lori. Rick, why don't you go first, then Lori?
I would just say, because I know this has been quite a labor for everyone involved, so I wanted to say thank you for that, both for the folks on the high school side, Glenn and his team, and Lisa and everyone who's been working so hard to get the information to Brooke and her team that they need. But I wanted to ask the question, Brooke, are there particular areas that are still hazy? And this is an opportunity for you to say, we really need to push on this because we've got to get this information. And
I will answer it in a very...
I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot. I just know that this is going to set us back if we do not get it resolved.
I will answer it in a diplomatic way. Every department, and if you look at the orange horizontal cells, every department needs to be looked at. I call them department, but they're, every area in this space summary needs to be blessed and reviewed. Some we haven't gotten the first draft, but even where we have a first draft, someone needs to say, yes, let's go with that as a draft. Will something change? That's possible, but we have some areas where we haven't received a first draft and others where we need the blessing. So I'd say every area needs to be looked at either one last time or kind of the first round. And if Margaret wants to talk about areas, go ahead, but I am too smart to do that right now.
So I have a lot to say about this, but let's hear from Lori first, and then I'll comment about Rick's question.
My comment actually, or question, sort of connects to what was just stated. Like, I'm thinking of like the auditorium and the performing arts section, particularly. Like, how does that, I'm assuming that's all part of this, correct?
Every space in the building is part of it. And I think I could say, and it wouldn't be out of line, and someone can correct me, but if someone is interested, first of all, we can share this draft with the committee. If you're interested in a particular piece, please come forward. And if you have some expertise in a particular area or interest, feel free to look at that area in particular, and we can share that. So I would say go through Margaret if you have questions about what we're doing in an area. There are many areas that we could share a draft of if that's appropriate. And I think it is for the building committee.
I do too.
Lori,
So let me comment about the key challenge of this, which is all of the departments are operating in a building that largely was not designed for a lot of the teaching and learning things they're doing. So, their buildings of this era were built with what I would say not much of a kind of grain of large and small spaces. They're all kind of large spaces, right? And people have occupied the building, according to adjacencies, they make sense because someone else new comes in and they move into the space next door, right? So spaces are not sized correctly, and people have occupied the building over time in a way that made sense. It's really hard in some of these cases to ask the staff, or asking them for an active imagination, which is to imagine something different. And I was very glad to hear that Brooke was able to arrange a visit to Billerica and Belmont, which are two relatively, recent projects that the Perkins and Will team has created so that they can start to see what the possibilities are. So the issue here is we're asking them to do something that's actually pretty difficult, and it's more difficult in some areas than others. I'll give a single example that's come up. So seminar rooms or huddle rooms, which are different kinds of smaller grain spaces than classrooms, right? The school doesn't have any of them. So when we say to the staff, how many seminar rooms do you need? That's a really hard question for them to answer. So that's the bridge that we're trying to make right now. And I really appreciate Perkins and Will has done it's a lot, so they're making educated guesses, but it all needs to be pressure tested, and then it all needs to be signed off. So.
But I will say, Rick, that we are behind schedule with this. I don't want to misrepresent that, because we have to take this information and come up with options for the end of the PDP in order to submit the book. And you'll see that we have a lot of options on the table. We have thought about where spaces go, and the nuances if something's bigger or smaller might be okay. It might not have a huge impact on the design, or it could, depending if something got significantly bigger. Z has tons of storage in this building, and that is a fact. And so what will the new building have, and where will all that equipment be stored? And that just on its own is a significant project to undertake, because we can see the cost of building. It's expensive, but he has tons of equipment and lots of space for it. So those are the things that we are analyzing as we move forward. We also look at comparative projects. For CTE, we look across 5 or 6 projects. We see what the average space sizes are, and then we can look at what is going on in that space, how many students are being accommodated, and make an estimate of that square footage. So that was a very productive meeting. So we are working through it. We're getting to the end of the line by, the couple days into next week. We'll want to have at least a draft where we feel comfortable that we could submit it to everyone.
Rick.
I think Rick has a question.
Yeah, I was just to reassure Lori's her question about are other things in here. What you're seeing on the slide is about 10% of the total worksheet. So you're seeing like a representative sample just to show you guys what's going on. So it is longer and wider than what you're seeing on the screen right now. There's a lot of information in it. So, but as Brooke said, when it's ready to be shared, I think they'll be happy to do that, and everyone can have a look at it.
Yeah, Betsy.
I just wanted to know if we needed to tell you who the person is or the people are that are going to approve these areas.
It will be the superintendent. Okay. Well, a superintendent's staff recommending the superintendent recommending to the school committee. So the final decision on the space summary in the ed program is the school committees. We want all of you to be aware of it and to understand how it relates to the design options. I want to give one other good example is the library. So, you have this vast library which people are operating in. And so the conceptualization, I want to say that the difference between the MSBA template for a library for this size school, it's a little over 6,000 square feet. You have 14,000 square feet. So how do you imagine yourself into the right sized, fabulous media center of the future, right? It's the imaginative leap that we have to make. That is, from my perspective, really the challenge. Okay, anything else? All righty, let's keep going.
All right, so we are going to continue with our update. As we said previously in the PDP, there will be a folder in your open files where all of these reports will be located. So you can take a deeper dive into any one of these. And again, when we get the existing condition video done of the major consultants, we will send that link to you as well. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this slide. You saw it before. There was a lot of discussion about 61.6 acres. We know it's less, and this is just a reminder that we are working within what is a smaller usable building area due to all the constraints noted on the left side of the slide. We also spent a little more time because we did receive the survey looking at the parking spaces and the number of parking spaces. We were able to count those spaces from the survey. All the lines are there. So I want to just make 3 comments. One is that the Salem parking for the high school, which is the circle, the numbers in blue. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but everything in blue in the parking areas, that's Salem High School parking. Everything in orange with a circle is the Horace Mann parking. And we understand that there are about 75 spaces in the front of Horace Mann. And we also understand that there are 40 spaces of the 110 spaces in that parking lot closest to Horace Mann. There's also, if you look at the southern portion of the site plan, there's a little number 51, and it says bus parking. That's where the buses park. So if we subtract the Horace Mann from the bus parking, we get 247 spaces allocated for the high school. And that's important because we were also told that we should maintain the existing parking count. So if Horace Mann does have those 70 spaces, and the buses do park in that location and will continue to park there, we have 247 spaces. So I'll pause on that because I know there was some discussion around the parking spaces in the previous meeting. So does anybody have any comments on maintaining that parking count?
Well, and let me just say, in terms of where the direction to maintain the existing parking count is coming from the mayor. So we could reduce it in the future. I think the real question, if there was a drive to do that, but I think it's really important for the design team to have really clear direction on what the maximum parking is. So we are treating this number as the maximum number and asking them to meet it in the iterations, and we can revisit it in the future, but I think holding the line at what seems to be functional now is what the mayor instructed us to do. Jenna, you have a question?
Yeah, just I mean, I just don't want to see the focus on parking take away from the focus on getting people there other ways. This site is very hard to walk to. Everybody tells kids not to bike because it's too dangerous and, to these schools. So I think I just don't want to see, and it's odd because we reduce parking on all the major developments, right? And we ask the developers to reduce parking, and you know what I mean? So I don't know what the right number of parking is, but I think it would be beneficial for us to know. I get trying to keep to what is existing so nobody complains, but I just think to think about this as like it's just going to be the same. We're just going to drive there and everyone's going to bus or drive is hopefully the wrong way to think about it.
And that is not, I think, how the mayor is thinking about it. So I think the issue again is, and I don't know if Beth Ann wants to chime in. So Beth Ann kind of definitely made a pitch at the last meeting to reduce parking overall. I think the mayor's perspective is that for this point where we are, we need to see what it looks like if we hold steady on the parking. Nate, comment, question?
My only comment was, I believe, and I don't know if the superintendent has joined us yet, but we had talked about trying to relocate the buses. So there potentially could be some more space available if the buses are relocated. That's all I was gonna say.
Yep. I'm here, Nate, now. Yeah, we talked about the fact that there might be, with the buses being out of there would definitely create more parking if you use the same amount of parking that we have now.
Would create more open space if we took the buses out but kept the parking level.
Right.
And that would be great. But that's
Yeah.
not our call. Z, you had your hand up.
Yes, and there's approximately 11 buses that we're trying to get rid of right now. That'll free up those spots.
And where are you getting rid of them to, if you're willing to say?
We're gonna put them out to bid.
Okay, got it. Okay, that's
Well,
super helpful to know.
And we'd suggest that whoever needs to meet about this, if you want our traffic consultant there, that's fine. But, clear direction on how we're proceeding would be great. So we are not increasing parking at the moment, and we're happy to decrease parking to create more green space and open space for the school. But that direction will be taken from the city. Bob.
Sorry, I'm driving from Boston. I'm in my truck. Sorry, been following the conversation. The only thing I would say about parking, I said at the end of the last meeting, is I totally respect everyone's opinion about, keep maintaining, downsize and all that. The only thing I'm going to say is if you're going to build a state-of-the-art facility and you're going to have events on weekends, not kids going to school, but if you're going to have events, if you're going to have events at night, like a tournament basketball game or the wrestling tournament or a band competition or, for the drum and flag, whatever it is, those people coming to those events are going to be parking. So if you're going to limit the parking, I respect that for, planning for the day-to-day use of the school, but you better be planning some sort of flex ability to have people park alternatively, or a combined space where a space that you're using in day-to-day operations of the school is one thing, but they can flip to parking for an event, because anyone who's been to an event at the high school, a big event, you see parking all the way down to the back road going out, all the way down towards the golf course. It becomes a free-for-all. And I mean, I've been there when the tow trucks have shown up to tow cars because cars park haphazardly with no direction and basically stop the flow of traffic out of the site. And that's all. I mean, some of that can be addressed traffic-wise, but maybe in the flow pattern, when you create the flow, that works better for the flow during an average school day. But on those occasions when you're going to try to attract more people, especially after hours, even like a play, I'm sorry, people's extended families, as much as we want to encourage them alternative transportation, if their aunt and uncle or grandmother and grandfather are coming from another community to visit, they're more than likely going to bring multiple vehicles, or unless they go to my house and we all hop into one car. So there better be some flexibility in the design. That's all I agree with what everyone's saying. You don't want to create, big asphalt area around a state-of-the-art school, but at the same time, there has to be some sort of flexibility with the design that accommodates when you are going to have those events that need it. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, and I would say that, that the happy medium there is between Jenna and Bob's comment, right? And that's kind of the art of making good site design decisions on a highly sustainable school. It's to create a flow of traffic that works for everyone, create one that isn't so car centric that students and parents don't feel safe encouraging, their students to bike to school. We need to provide the areas of safe, secure, kind of sheltered bike parking. So there are things that we will be doing that you may not be seeing kind of labeled on the site plans at this development, that really encourage biking. And if you went to the Belmont project of ours, you can kind of see that in action. We thought really deeply about how we encourage more sustainable ways of getting to school on that project, and the amount of kind of bikes on that site is really tremendous now. And it's a total shift from where they were in their existing building. So we will get there on some of those issues, and you may not see them kind of called out directly on the plans at this level, but it is really important to your design team. So.
All right. I think we're gonna move on.
Okay, so we wanted to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the surveys. We have put out there 3 surveys, student surveys, faculty surveys, as well as the community surveys. And we are really looking for more voices. We did get a lot of faculty feedback, so that's great. We really want more student feedback. And just to give you, all of the surveys will be translated into graphics, so you can see really clearly what people are saying and what they're asking for. It makes it fun and easy to read. This is just a quick sample. We are getting some responses, and we put some things out here, but this is just really a fraction. I won't go through everything, but just to point out that 25% were special education educators, 22% were social study educators. 55% had 5 years of experience with the high school. So we really want the educators from all disciplines to fill this out. They talked about spaces needed, which are the 63% cafe for access to food throughout the day. 61% said outdoor social spaces. 61% said garden space around the school or rooftop. I won't get into any more of this. You can see it here, and we will be sending out more of this. 95% did say interdisciplinary education was important to them. And of course, the issues around thermal comfort and temperature, windows that are limited to having views outside and inflexible classrooms. So all of these things that we're seeing tie together to what you're also asking for. We have gotten student surveys, but not enough. And we have almost 1,000 students in the building, so we would like to get more survey responses. We would love to get some more responses from the 11th and 12th graders. 36% of the respondents were 10th graders. 61% identify as LGBTQ plus, and 39% identify as neurodivergent. And that identification really does have an impact on the kinds of spaces that we create, because those neurodivergent students will need different kinds of spaces to make them comfortable in this building. And they wanted access to food all day, 77%. 70% said mindful or wellness rooms, and 70% said outdoor social spaces. And then 71% listed their study spaces as individual spaces, cozy nooks, and quiet corners. 2 people did raise their hand. Please feel free to voice your question.
Carla, do you want to go first?
I'm sorry, who?
Carla?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear my name. Thank you. Yes, I wanted to ask about the Latino families. Did you get any responses? And also students as well.
Well, this one was the faculty responses. This is the student responses. Did I put up is it in the orange box? Can you see how many students responded?
Yes, I'm wondering of your responses, were you able to differentiate whether the students were Latino students or not?
We have that information. I didn't put it here yet, so I don't have it offhand, but I can get that to you. But that was, we did have that as one of the questions. I'm sure we have that.
Just curious. Thank you. I'm sorry. I was just curious how much, what the response was from non-English speakers.
Sure, and I will get that to you. And we didn't put it here on the summary, but I can absolutely get that to you. And that's a really important question, because we do want to make sure we're getting diverse voices and that all voices are heard. And that's really important. So that's why we put this out in, we didn't just put it out in English. We wanted to attract all voices. So maybe you can help with that as we try to encourage more responses.
And obviously not just Latino students. Obviously, I know the high
Sure.
school also has
Yeah.
Asian.
I mean, we just
speakers.
want more voices heard so we can get more data points. Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So Beth Ann?
Thanks. I just have a question because I think I don't think I'm understanding a little bit of the process piece around. It's taken me a couple of minutes to think through this about the teachers or the staff at the school. You said that we're behind. So I'm a little confused on that point. Like, so, because it sounds like, okay, we did some Perkins, Will, you all did some outreach to teachers, asking them for their kind of wish list of what they wanted. Some of those groups are a little bit behind. And I have to be honest, every time I hear the words "we're behind" in these meetings, I get frustrated because we haven't actually been in this process that long. So I just want to be very clear about what this means, because our teachers do a lot of work and have full-time jobs. So how are we behind in this regard with teachers? Like, where, A, am I misunderstanding? B, if I'm not, what was the process to engage our teachers?
When we said we would like to be further along, it wasn't particularly relative to the survey. It was relative to the space summary. We would just love people to answer the survey. But
Right. No, I know what I'm talking about, the sort of a couple of minutes ago when we were talking, when Rick brought this up, that the space survey stuff. I'm just a little concerned about that part.
Okay, we are.
So
Yes.
let me speak to this. So it relates directly, frankly, Beth Ann, to what you're saying. I think that we were a bit too we didn't lean heavily enough in the fall on the district and staff to contribute to the space summary and the ed program. And I'll take some responsibility for that. I think that it was precisely because we understood that everybody's got a full-time job and we're asking them to tackle another job. Now, I will be totally frank and say it's been a scramble. And I have encouraged people to keep in mind that what we're trying to do right now is get one complete iteration of this process so that we can step back and look at it. But we can't step back and look at it until we get one complete iteration. So that's kind of where it stands. It is somewhat out of sequence. If you go back to my original presentations about when this work was going to be done, we had hoped to have it done before the end of the year. So now, in terms of the sequence of work relative to what Perkins and Will has to do, it's catching up. It didn't march in lockstep together. So I think I can actually see that there are quite a few folks who are listening. And so I say this for the benefit of the school committee, as well as all the staff. I mean, the folks who have been helpful here have been tremendous. And the goal right now is to get through one iteration so we can stand back together and make sure, Glenn made a really good point in a conversation yesterday that we have this document, it doesn't yet have the teacher's voice in it, right? It still needs a lot of synthesis, but it is a requirement of the PDP submission, which is what I spoke about when we first met back in whatever that was, June. It's a requirement of the PDP submission that we give them an iteration of this and the school committee have a chance to take it up and look at it. So a little bit out of sync, but and I think best of intentions in terms of not taking people away from their work, but catching up. So,
Okay, thank you for
Anna?
explaining that.
And just to tag on one thought on one idea on that, we are continuing with the site planning and the building layouts relative to what we've heard. If there were really significant changes, that could be an issue, but we haven't stopped and waited to get this. We have continued with design work that you'll see tonight. And that's why we say we're working within a range of gross square footage to be able to see what fits comfortably in the different locations as we design and plan the site. So we're going on, we're continuing with our work. However, yes, it would be great to get one great draft of that and look at it, step back and look at it and let everyone have a chance to have their voice in the process.
Anna?
Yeah, I just a couple quick questions. First is, if you want more response from this, would you send the survey to committee members? I mean, we can post it on Facebook. I mean, a variety of things we can try to get engagement. And then second, like you talk about these deadlines, and I'm not trying to stall or miss deadlines, but you know, this part of the process is so important for getting community engagement and getting, you know, the right programming in, I think Perla's comment on Latino community. I'm just wondering, like, if we miss that deadline, are we like, out of luck? Or, is there any point at which we get to like take a little bit of time? I feel like this is going very fast, which is, I get it. I mean, I've worked in construction, but I just, this is a huge, huge decision and a huge, huge project. So I just, it would be good if we could get more engagement and more time at some point, but I just don't know if that's possible.
So I want to sort of point back to the schedule that I showed at the beginning. We do need the next round of community engagement will be right after we make the PDP submittal. We honestly had about the best round of community engagement I've ever had on a project because we scheduled, it was because of the holidays, we scheduled a set of community meetings very closely together. But it was very good because it was very iterative. Now we're going to be able to, in the next round of meetings, share the information that you all are looking at now with the larger community. Jenna, to your point, yes, we can definitely send the links to everybody here and ask them to share them. And we would be grateful for the assistance with that. And if anybody, the communications subcommittee could come together and have a meeting also about how to kind of further spread the word. So.
But just to be careful, the surveys, each one is targeted to a different group. So we don't want a community member filling out the student survey. That would skew the information. So we do want to be careful that, it's going to the right person so we get the right data.
It would also be helpful, and we don't need to discuss it now, maybe you can send something out. How is it being communicated that a survey is available now? Because I'll be honest with you, I don't know how students are hearing about it, or teachers for that matter.
Steve, can you speak to that? Because I think it's gone out in your newsletter.
Yeah, we've sent out the survey via my newsletter and a couple of blasts that we've sent out separately. I think Chris is on here too. We've also posted it, I think, on social media to staff. We sent it to middle and high school staff. The 90 responses is pretty good for staff. Overall with students, I think we've sent it out 2 times via their emails, but I think we have to create some time for them to do it in school. Like you basically have to tell them.
Lori is agreeing.
The next half hour to do it. So
Carla's agreeing.
I'm not sure if Glenn's on here, but I think somewhere we could find the time to make sure we get more students on it, and I can have the middle school because we sent it to 6 to 12, I believe, is who received the survey. But we have to create the space in school for it to happen.
I think that's a great idea. Give everyone 12 minutes, 10
Yeah.
minutes, because it doesn't take that long. They'll answer it really quickly. And yeah, I think that's a great idea. Thank you for that.
Matt,
Yeah, I was trying to locate it in various communication. One, can we even just get it on the website or the building committee website?
mm-hmm. Community survey you're talking about.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we can. Chris?
Just food for thought. What about a couple assemblies? Maybe at Collins, at the high school. Would that help?
I gotta believe.
Lori?
Oh, go ahead, Lori.
I would suggest, and sometimes this can be hit or miss, we have what's called crew. It's like an advisory block.
Right.
And it's about 20 minutes. It meets Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I'm sorry, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And so it only works, and it's smaller groups. So like I have, I don't know, 12 seniors that are in my crew and they've been with me since they were sophomores. Maybe try to not push, but do the survey during crew blocks. Just a suggestion.
Does every student participate in crew?
They're supposed to, yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah,
Okay. So there's an opportunity there.
correct. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge, we do have about 11 or 12 folks in the public, and one of them raised their hand. But Nate, I think we should take that during public comment unless
Correct.
you or Rick disagree. So Manu,
Yeah,
I
let's
don't want
hold
you
the
to think I'm
public comment.
ignoring you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's hold the public comment.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Onwards.
And just to be clear, the 3 surveys are students, faculty, and caregivers. The overall community survey we were holding on. So this is the caregiver survey, some of the responses, and 67% have been a member of the community for 10 years. 72% will have a student in Salem High School in the future, and 60% have never seen the school, rarely visits. And the top 3 reasons they visit will be because of a music performance, sport event, or drop off and pick up. And they spoke very highly for the desire to have spaces for community gatherings with classmates and family. 63% said STEAM spaces were either extremely important or very important. And they said that they'd like to see in the future facility athletic facilities access, health services, and adult education. So that's the summary of this. But again, we have lots of data points we can put out. And the more responses we get, the more that will fill, the data will fill out. So I think we have spoken enough on this, but we look forward to sending these out through other channels. And I love the idea of the students being able to do this in school. Maybe the teachers can do it with them. So at this point, we are going to talk about the preliminary evaluations of alternatives. And I'll just set this up by saying that we are not required to pick an option at this point. We are only required to look at renovation only, which is using your existing building, which we can almost do with maybe a small addition. Renovation addition, we're reusing part of the building or new construction. That's what we're required to do. And we have been proceeding with that based on the information we have. We have gotten a lot of information, so we don't want to sell what we have received short, because we have, and we're actually getting, every time we send out a different means of gathering information, whether it's visioning or surveys or presentations with the community outreach, we're getting similar responses. So we're seeing a common response about spaces and needs. So that's good. That's good because that informs our design. So Patrick's going to take you through the options that we looked at and where we are now, and we'll go through them and we'll save maybe the questions until after the presentation.
Yeah, Brooke and Patrick, I just want to chime in. I believe in the mayor's notice to all of you, he commented that because of the way the MSBA agreement is written, even though the school committee has made a clear decision about 912, we are required to demonstrate that we have looked at 712 at this level. So Perkins and Will is going to continue to develop options for 712, and it's driven by the MSBA funding agreement.
Right. I mean, I will say tonight, we're going to focus on 9 through 12 because since the last meeting, we were showing kind of the 7 through 12 option because it was the bigger option. But tonight, we're going to focus more on the 9 through 12.
Right. So this is a snapshot. Thank you, Brooke and Margaret. This was a snapshot of kind of where we were last time we met. And as Brooke just mentioned, we really were focused at that time on a 7 through 12 option. If you remember, we presented those options because obviously they're a bigger building. They have significantly more kind of access needs, especially with the expression of needing separate entry for a middle school. So we started there and we presented those at the last meeting. Tonight, we want to focus on a kind of a few options. And these are options that really, the ones that made sense if this was just the 9 through 12 configuration. So we've kind of focused on those and we're going to walk through 3 of them. The addition renovation scheme there, which was scheme C, and then a new construction scheme, which is scheme H and scheme I. The loop scheme there that is highlighted in yellow is a new scheme that kind of came out of conversation from feedback we heard at the last meeting. And really the question there was, can we build kind of on the northern edge of the site? And the answer is for the 9 through 12 configuration, the building does fit there at a reasonable height. So we're going to walk through that option.
And Patrick, I just wanted to chime in and shout out to the design working group. We're really grateful for their effort and time and significant attention to this. So please be aware that you have some distinguished designers, folks on the design working group committee who we are meeting with to get their feedback. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that.
Yeah, they've been super helpful. So next slide. So this scheme is a kind of a graduation of the scheme that we showed at the last meeting in strictly a 9 through 12 configuration. And if you recall, this is the scheme that keeps the existing field house and the 2 gymnasiums in that space and renovates them, and then creates a building that in a very concise footprint and a very sustainable footprint kind of wraps that building and creates a building that kind of stitches together these kind of 2 wings of academic space around those shared spaces in the center of the building. In this configuration, with the current programming square footage range of 415 to 435,000, this would be a 4-story building. And one of the things we're really beginning to understand is how these buildings would sit into the topography of landscape. We have a bit more information on the survey of the site and understanding kind of the slopes on the site. We also have learned a lot about the daycare program and how that fits into the high school and is part of the CTE program and what the vision of that is for the future. So one thing you'll see that's different in this scheme is that we're providing a separate drop-off access on the southern kind of point of the building for a dedicated daycare drop-off and parking area. And you also see directly adjacent to that a daycare play space. And we're placing that on this location on the site because in some ways it's insulated from the activity of the high school. It would have its own sense of scale. It's down a level from the main entry of the high school, so there would be controlled access to it from the interior of the high school. But it really will feel like it has its own entry, its own sequence, and its own sense of safety kind of in the quieter half of the site. You'll also see that we're based on the recommendations from our traffic engineer, we're really recommending that the primary high school entry happens from Wilson Street on that far east side of the site. And you will kind of loop around and through the site to come to the main drop-off loop. But in some ways that's good because it allows the traffic to spread out and stack on the site in the way and to take congestion away from what is currently the main entry on the site. And we're recommending that that would be two-way traffic along that loop. And then once you get to the main drop-off loop, it would be a one-way loop. And we've been talking with our traffic engineers on how to kind of separate bus drop-off and parent drop-off kind of within that loop to ease congestion, so we don't kind of create the same situation that you have currently on your site. If you go to the next slide, we've kind of refined the way that this project would be phased in this configuration. And as Margaret said earlier, some of these schemes have a more drawn out process of phasing or a shorter one. And that obviously has cost implications because it means you would be mobilizing the kind of trades that are building the building twice, say in a two-phase scheme versus a single-phase scheme. So this is a three-phase scheme. And you can see in the first phase, what we're considering is building completely outside of the existing footprint of the building. And in that phase, we would have auditorium, music, daycare, some CTE, and classroom spaces. And that wing would be able to be completed kind of completely in its construction without any changes significantly to the operation of the interior of the existing high school. That allows us to then kind of move the auditorium spaces, the music spaces, carpentry, things that are in the wing directly to the north of the gymnasium into the new wing so that we can construct the kind of largest portion of the building. And then when that happens, that allows us to kind of create a temporary connection between those two wings, completely demolish the existing building, and then connect the scheme to kind of finish the building. And in that phase, we would also be completing the site work for the project. So you'd get your field space, your drop-off space in that configuration. So this is kind of the simplest way to build concisely around the gymnasium. And you can see that it has some challenges because we're really kind of building around the active school. So we have to think about ways that we can safely and securely create the building in phases. And some quick massing, just starting to look at the scale of a scheme like this. And you can see what it really does is it places an entry to the building that kind of gathers folks together. So you can imagine a really beautiful outdoor space that sets up cafeteria spaces that can serve the gymnasium, really clear circulation directly into the building and into the gymnasium space. And this really beautiful kind of new field and outdoor learning environment that is to the north of the building that really beautifully gets kind of nestled in between the ledge outcroppings that naturally occur on the site. So between the building and those ledge outcroppings, you really get a kind of campus feel at the heart of the site. And you can see one of the challenges for this scheme is that we are keeping the parking where it is right now to kind of minimize costs. And they still remain, reasonably far from the main entry, kind of like what you have right now. And that's something that definitely is a challenge to the scheme. There would obviously be visitor parking and accessible parking near the front entry, but the bulk of the parking has a similar relationship to what you have right now in your existing building. So moving on from that scheme, and we can kind of come back for conversation. This scheme is the development of building to the northwest corner of the building. And you can see in this scheme, when it's strictly a 9 through 12 configuration, we're able to get the footprint of this scheme to be built completely without interrupting the existing building. So this would be a kind of single primary construction phase scheme, which is different from the previous scheme. This is also a 4-story scheme. Also recommends moving the primary high school entry to the east side from Wilson Street. But you can see that this sets up a relationship where as soon as you come to the kind of height of the road there, you're going to get a clear view of the building entry across the playing fields. And that's really going to help kind of site circulation. If you're a visitor or you've come to the school or you don't come to the school often, you're going to come to the site and immediately understand kind of where the primary entry is. You can also see that it also puts the primary parking lots that exist pretty close to the existing entry. It also puts them close to what could be the CTE programs that are more outward facing on that side of the building. Whether they be the cafe or kind of any outward facing services, it's possible that they could exist on that side of the building and be very close to kind of convenient parking on the site. This scheme also puts the daycare in a place that is less busy on the site, though it is closer to Highland Avenue, and we would probably want to think about, you know, visually creating a bit of a buffer from Highland Avenue through tree planting and things like that, so that that can feel like it's a reasonable scale. But one question we have with this scheme is kind of around the staggering of times for daycare drop-off and high school use. Since this combines the two loops, the bus drop-off loop, as well as the daycare drop-off loop, we would want to think really carefully with the district about the timing that those would happen. You can also see that we are separating, parent drop-off and bus drop-off in this scheme, with the idea that parent drop-off could enter the site and peel off and circulate around parking in a separate loop from bus drop-off. So they enter the site in the same way, but they quickly peel off to kind of create less congestion. This scheme really maximizes the potential for new fields. The other thing you'll notice in each one of these schemes that I didn't mention is that we're thinking about where a potential geo exchange well field might happen if that ends up being the preferred mechanical system. Those well fields take a fair amount of time to drill, and they really can't happen in the second phase of the project because they need to be online for the building to open before you deconstruct the existing building. So you might think, why are they not closer to the facility? Why are they not underneath the new fields? And the reason is it's because those fields won't be built until the second or third phase of the project.
Just to add one other thing, I don't think you said this, but we are required to consider how you would add to the building if the population increases. And really, in most of these, in probably all the cases, adding would be a floor above, sizing the structure appropriately so you could build a floor above. And that's something we should talk about because that would have an impact on some of the infrastructure below if you did add something above.
Right. A second option we were discussing for this scheme might be that you add where parking is and then take one of your playing fields for parking. So there could be a kind of long-term trade that happens there. So as I mentioned, this is a simpler idea for phasing. You really demolish the auto facility, which, you know, might have a temporary home somewhere else. Build this new school in its entirety adjacent to the existing school, and then demolish the existing school once the students have moved into the new school. And at that point, you can complete the site work. So really two major phases of construction, a phase where you build the new building and a phase where you then demolish and build the fields. So the scheme like that would have the shortest construction duration overall. And you can see that this puts the building very close to Highland. So you'd have an image of the building from Highland. And we can kind of think about if the scheme develops what that image would want to be. And it really takes the front entry to the building and faces it south and faces it towards what wants to be the new entry point from the site, from Wilson. So you'd arrive on site and you'd imagine kind of looking across the fields and across outdoor learning environments at this south-facing entry to the building. And then lastly, we were debating whether or not to call this the loop scheme or the Salem Commons scheme, because it's roughly shaped like Salem's Commons. But this takes the approach of building new without interrupting the existing school footprint on the north corner of the site. And this is probably the area of the site that is the most kind of aggressive in its slope, and also has a large topographic mound of ledge. So there's some cost associated with kind of doing the earthwork and blasting to kind of build in this area of the site, and it's not without its complexity. The benefits of this is that you get the kind of image of the school from Wilson Street, and really from the corner of Wilson and Highland, you're going to see the building. And what this one does is it considers, what if we build a kind of loop scheme that has both an internal court that could be kind of secure and more inward facing for our outdoor learning, and then really face the entry to the building towards the inner portion of the site. So you would come in from that same location on Wilson Street as the other schemes. And from that point, you can either move to the right to a daycare drop-off zone, and we would create a much more concise play area for the daycare program due to the constraints in the scheme. Or you could come to the left and go through a parent drop-off loop around a more centralized parking lot that is fairly close to the main entry of the building and centrally located on the site as well, both for playing field access as well as the building. Or bus drop-off would continue. And the idea here is that the bus drop-off could happen across really what would be kind of a plaza space, so that during the day, that space could really be utilized as a way to kind of integrate outdoor learning and playing fields with the school environment, and to really think about having that portion of the road only be accessible during drop-off periods and after hours. And this scheme in particular is kind of 4 stories on one side, and then because the landscape slopes down to the north, we can get daylight and program kind of at a what we would call a kind of lower level to the building that faces the north edge of the site. So challenges for this scheme is that you can see everything is very tightly packed on that north side. So while it has the benefit of a single phase construction, this is really a building with no back door. You're going to have CTE access on one side, entry on another side, and daycare drop-off, and really no room for a third entry to the north due to the site constraints. So it's very compact, and as a result, likely very efficient, and it has short construction duration, but it has that complexity of building where there's a lot of ledge on the site, and it really is a building that packs a lot in, so it has some constraints in terms of access. And then you can see that phasing is very simple. You build, and then you demo, build the fields. And here's a very kind of early massing, just giving you a sense of the scale of the building on the site. So that's a summary of where we are. We will be digging in deeper into the renovation scheme. We have been kind of saving that for last, mostly because the program is moving around a bit. And as we think about how that would be kind of elegantly fit into your existing spaces, we want to let the program really get settled before we dive into that scheme. If there's anything either from our working group committee or Brooke that you want to add that I missed, please do.
Thank you. Nate has his hand up.
No, go ahead, Brooke. If you want to add to it, then go ahead, then I'll come after you.
No, I really just want to reiterate, no one has to panic that they have to make a decision now. This is really exploring all the options, and we think that we found the 2 sites that would work for new construction, which is required by the MSBA to explore and worthy of exploration, because it does have less impact to students, and it's less complex. It's a shorter duration. So this is where we ended up now. Please.
And one more thing, just to let you know,
sure.
we have, as we were developing these, we're also developing with our energy modelers. So we're at the point now where, because the program is getting, fixed within a certain percentage, because we have some site strategies that have particular orientations and massing and layout, we felt confident that we could kind of pull the trigger to do that analysis. So at our next meeting, we will likely have life cycle energy analysis for each one of them. So we'll be able to look at these and say which, not only are they performing in terms of sequence, in terms of impact, but also in terms of operational cost. And obviously with that comes carbon.
So thanks, Patrick. I have a comment and a question. The comment is, what's really appealing to me is minimal interruption of students in class and teaching and learning appeals to me the most. So I like the idea of being able to maybe build independently of, the existing structure. That appeals to me. The question is, you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I'm guessing it's appealing to try to have a school that has sight lines off of Highland Ave and maybe Wilson Street. You've mentioned it a couple of times, and if that's the case, I'm just wondering how that would impact traffic if the school was closer to, or the entrances were closer to Highland Ave and or Wilson Street.
Yeah, it's a good question. All of the data so far is telling us that to pull the entry of the site away from the intersection of Highland and Wilson will significantly relieve the congestion at that corner of the site. So what happens right now is cars queue up there, and those cars might not even be associated with high school use. And then folks are leaving the site and they have to cross that queue of traffic, essentially. So the more we can pull that entry and that exit from the site down onto the east side of the site and away from the Highland-Wilson intersection, the better a flow of traffic will be, the more predictable the flow of traffic will be, so the better that light can be timed. And so we have a bit of an interesting kind of site challenge in that way, which is to create an identity of the school along Highland, so that the school is known to the broader community more, but do it in such a way where we still encourage the primary entry to the site to be further away from that intersection. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But Nate, were you talking about, do you like the idea of seeing the school? Let's put it back to you. Do you like the idea of seeing the school in Highland? Do you like the idea of it having more presence on Wilson?
I would actually, the loop doesn't really appeal to me, mainly for that reason. It just, now again, I don't have kids in the school, but just as a resident who travels along, who doesn't live far from there, I travel along Highland Ave and Wilson Street. Just having it closer to those streets, it just says to me, it's going to be more traffic. The other thing that's not appealing, you talk about the ledge and how that would be costlier. And we don't really know how costly that can be, because it could be maybe far worse than we're anticipating. So, but again, then what appeals to me with that is the fact that you are building that school without having to alter or do anything to the existing school while it's being built. So, there's pros and cons, obviously, to all of these. At first glance, and this is just first glance, the loop didn't really appeal to me, but I'd like to unpack it a little bit more.
Yeah, and we'll be trying to get our arms around those costs. They won't be exact, but at least order of magnitude, understanding, if there's a real penalty to building in that area, let's try to understand what it is. We know that that's probably stone directly 6 inches below the soil. So, we can at least get a sense of what those costs are. And in that way, as Brooke said, we're not making decisions tonight mostly because we don't have the information to make that decision. You're going to want to understand if you go to a 3-phase building, what is the penalty for that longer duration in terms of cost?
Right. Thanks. I saw Bob's hand up first.
Thank you, Nate. I just want to echo what you just said. I want to thank the design team and everybody for all the work they've done on the the three iterations that we're looking at and the potential for all of them. But I mean, when you look at the design costs and how much the other incurred costs are, I think Nate touched on it, is what's the cost of the kids that are in there learning and the teachers that are trying to teach if all of a sudden, we stated earlier the district's got, extra room. Are we talking about moving everybody off site, or are we talking about bringing in trailers if we're going to demolish the school and build a new one? I mean, the interruption of the education of the children that, the building still serves is, I think, something that needs to be factored into the cost, because, those temporary trailers that, everyone hates are, sometimes a fact of, construction, but not for, not at this age to be putting teachers and kids out in trailers or alternative sites and be able to, even though it's more challenging, not interrupting their educational experience, because they're not going to benefit from this building, most of them. So I think that's just something to be considered when you factor in all those soft costs. And I guess my last question would be is we've, highlighted, which early on, the $1,000 a square foot, which when I was driving almost made me swerve off the road. But I would also say, what's the projected cost for renovation costs? I mean, if we do look at a design that is maybe encompassing an part of the existing structure, and then maybe adding on. I was just wondering if you've gotten it. I know that the school building authority doesn't like renovations. They kind of lean more towards new construction. But I was just curious if you have any kind of a handle on what the renovation cost would be per square foot. Thank
Bob,
you.
I wouldn't say that MSBA leans more towards new construction. I think that's not a mantra of the MSBA at all. They look for the most cost-effective, educationally sound, sustainable solution, and it's whatever that is. With the renovation only, you will be moving students around the building, so there's cost to that. Sometimes you have to replicate a space when you're renovating that space. Same might be true for the addition renovation. We haven't quite figured out if you would need modular trailers for classrooms in that option, but that is a possibility. So all of those things will be factored in, and when you see when you see the cost for the PDP at that level, you'll see the impacts of renovation, only renovation, addition, new construction. And then you'll have a matrix when you make the decision on the pros and cons, and you will have an evaluation matrix of the things that are important to you, and educational impact is what probably sounds like will be one of those points in which you will evaluate the preferred option.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Anna and then Jenna.
Oops, thank you. Just a pure cost question, and apologies if this is something that was discussed at the last meeting. I unfortunately missed that meeting. Just thinking about the alternatives and the sort of the trade-offs between, as I understand it, the MSBA, there's some limitations on reimbursements related to like new gym and auditorium spaces. And so just thinking about the trade-offs between scenarios that involve new gym or auditorium construction versus scenarios that are maybe sort of have to be that are multi-staging scenarios. And so I guess any information that you're able to provide on that could be helpful just for everyone, I think, in terms of thinking through the cost implications. I'm in my mind, as you were going through these, I was trying to think, what's the trade-off between the first one you were showing there? Looked like we were reusing some space, but it was a multi-staging scenario. And I was thinking, I wonder how it plays out with cost versus the other ones. Yeah, so just curious for any information you might have on that.
Yeah, I think maybe Brooke or Margaret, if we could walk through kind of the thinking on the gymnasium space, like in terms of what's being assumed right now for a new build gym versus the kind of space that you have right now in your existing gym, just as a baseline.
Well, I mean, right now, we were looking at saving the field house, which is about 23,000 square feet. Your existing main gym is about 18,800 square feet. We are looking at a new gym at about 18,000 square feet. So pretty similar.
If there were to be a new gym, it would be.
If it's in the new construction option, there would be a gym, and then we're looking at that because that gives you 3 practice courts and 1 competition court. And that's the last couple of projects. That's about the size. It's the size that you saw in Bill Ricca for those who went. And then the question is that other space, which I think is somewhere between 48,000 or 5,000. That's that little gym where you have the strength and conditioning, the weight room, and then that basketball court. That hasn't been totally decided what that size space is in the new construction, but obviously we would reuse it. And that's a really great point that you make, because that will be taken into consideration. What offsets? You get a bigger gym, but you have a lot of phasing in field house. If you replicate that, you have less phasing, so less cost associated with phasing. So the first conversation with the estimator was it was more of a wash, so you could have that bigger space. So that was his first inclination when we asked him that. So those are great questions, and you clearly get it. But yes, the MSBA doesn't reimburse for everything that's over the guidelines. The auditorium right now we're carrying, I'd say it's about 690 seats, and that's in the guidelines, so we're following that. But anything outside the guidelines, there would be a case made for why that's needed, and then the MSBA could determine whether or not that was something they would reimburse on. I don't know, Margaret, if you want to chime into that.
Well, I mean, Anna, you put your finger on the complexity of this. So it would be, if it were a smaller building or a less complicated program, it would be really easy to see one piece of this, but it's sort of multiple layers of stuff. I think when the estimator sort of comes up with a value, which we'll be showing you at the next meeting, a conceptual value for these, you'll start to see that. But it's a complicated calculation, because the way I think about it, just as I had my list up at the top of, the big factors. So the biggest factor in sort of what the community pays is how far above the MSBA cap you are. But what goes into that, where you are on that number, is all the things Brooke and Patrick talked about. So I don't really have much to add other than to say it is a complicated calculation. And Bob, I think you probably most of all of the folks on the building committee sort of, have a sense of how these pieces play in together. So it's not a straightforward calculation of renovation is cheaper because of the longer duration, is the simplest way to put it.
I'm a firm believer the sum of the parts never equal the whole.
Fair.
So these are really good questions, and I understand some of them. It's kind of like these are the answers that are all coming together at the same time. The energy question, the operational energy question, the pricing models, the phasing. It's all going to kind of crystallize in pretty shortly, and then you'll have the roll up of those answers kind of together.
Jenna, thanks, Patrick. Jenna.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to mention, I thought I need to dig in more on the designs and things like that, but I think a couple notes is that we should consider there's going to be disruption to the classrooms and everything, whichever way we go. This is a long construction, but I would mention noise. If you have to do a lot of blasting, you're already going to do the drilling and blasting. We've experienced in Salem the blasting of ledges, and it's quite disruptive. So I think we just need to think about like all the disruptions, the construction vehicles, how early they come, and the leaving and going and all of that. So, it may be some consideration to like, is there some of these extra space that we have in Salem schools? Maybe we move some, like the daycare or other things that might be very sensitive. But I just want to note that should be considered. And the other is that I appreciate you guys showing kind of like, like what you might do to the upper fields and other things, but we probably will have to put like a, where's our boundary, right? And set expectations of the community. Because I know those upper fields, they also have an accessibility issue. You can't get there. And so anytime we touch them, we're going to have to fully make them accessible. So I think, sort of setting, thinking about this, we can do a lot now, but we don't necessarily have to do it all. And setting the community's expectations about what we can do now versus what could be something that could be made in the future.
Yeah,
Because we don't want to promise oh, we're going to redo all the parking lots and all the fields and
Right. And that's a really good point, Jen. And usually what we do is, work with Margaret and her team to essentially set up those prices so that this committee kind of can see it a la carte in a way and begin to understand what the order of magnitude is, so that the true scope boundary gets determined, and that makes sense. So, and we definitely appreciate your comments about the construction sequencing and the disruption, because obviously any construction on the site, especially major building, is going to be disruptive no matter how close it is to the building. And as soon as we get some other voices kind of around the team in the next phase, we'll really start to tease out how to do that in a way that is the least disruptive that we can do.
Thanks, Patrick. Mark, in the interest of time, why don't we go ahead and move to the finance working group?
We got through all the design slides. Well done, team.
And please, we'll share this, and please provide any additional comments. These are really good points everyone's making. We take it to heart, and we I think we'll change the language on those fields to say, possible. I don't know. We'll talk about it, but we want to be careful what we put out there isn't inappropriately stated and people's expectations are met or not. We don't want to provide something that isn't going to happen, putting a note on that. So we should get direction from you on how to fix some of the language on these.
But I will say it's very helpful, because now I can start to kind of conceptualize what it looks like. So I appreciate the work behind all this. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know what? I see Rick's had his hand up, but I want to just also touch on one other thing. So Rick, why don't you say what you have to say, and let me add one comment.
Well, I was kind of laying back because we've been having a lot of conversations in the design working group, but I wanted to address Bob's comment or question about the cost of just a pure renovation. And I think one of the challenges for these folks is not only the phasing, but even if we do a pure renovation scheme, the building has to completely be brought up to code. And that means everything, not just the building systems, but the envelope. Basically, you're stripping it down to the structure and rebuilding the building in order to meet the new codes. So it's not a paint and paper job. So the cost is going to be slightly less, but it's not going to be that much less. And I'm not a cost estimator, but I've done this enough to know that that's the case.
Think about those 20-foot wide corridors, which you probably want to tuck in a little bit. And what are those walls, and are they structural? And there's a lot of implications. So you're right. We will also do a code only, and I put it in quotes, code only option, which means no educational upgrades. That's required as part of this.
Yeah. So Perkins and Well team, one thing you didn't touch on, but I would like to at least touch on before we go to the finance working group, is the thinking about what is on the ground floor of the building relative to above, because this is a really key driver of what is changing here. I've said before, right now it's like you walk in the door, go left for VOTEC and go right for academics. Like this building is being conceptualized to sort of bring those two things together. And there are a lot of demands, and you heard Patrick talk about some of them, about what needs to be at grade level. This is going to be a real driver. So back to the questions that have been asked about how imagining things into the future. So once you make decisions about what's on the ground floor, that has implications, for instance, for special education, because now special education might be distributed over several floors, right? And thought about in a very different way. So could you guys say just a couple words about how you're approaching this?
Yeah, to start, as you said, Margaret, this is really a building that is going to have a lot of competing needs for ground level access. So when I mentioned the challenges with the site, kind of accessing the outside of the building, that's not the only kind of constraint. We really have a lot of programs that want to be on that, are kind of fighting for the attention on the ground level. And that will make for a very vibrant kind of public first floor of the building in a way. And it's going to, because a lot of those programs are CTE programs that require drive-in access or loading access, et cetera, or say connection to the kitchen in culinary sake. Those are programs that will be, I think, inevitably kind of on display because they will be likely part of that ground floor experience. And that means that we're going to be working really hard with the architecture to find elegant solutions to kind of bring students kind of up through the building and really connect those academic programs kind of down to what probably will be a very heavy CTE heavy base to the building. And that's something that needs a lot more development, a lot more conversation, kind of what the integration of programs together are like in these site tests. But it's important to kind of set the stage that there is this heavy need for ground level access for a lot of those CTE programs, and it's going to kind of drive the character of that first floor.
And just to be really specific, we created a list with this associated square footage of the things so far that we're hearing need to be on the first floor. So that's North Shore Health, it's some of admin, it's the daycare, it's automotive, it's carpentry. You know, typically you'll have access to the auditorium on the first floor. So if you start to look at these spaces, you'll start to see that all these square footages are adding up, and then we have a footprint, and we have almost more need on the first floor than we have space and footprint. So it seems like the list that we have, which we have been sharing and we can continue to share, we can even make notes on that program on what, like a little check, which is the things that we see are on the first floor, but it's pretty much the non-negotiables that we're putting on the first floor at this point.
Right, thank you. And I want to just acknowledge we're at 7:56. So we've got Finance Working Group, public comment, and adjourning. So we'll turn it over to Anthony, I think, at this point.
Okay, the Finance Working Group met yesterday, February 12th, and approved 2 invoices. Answer's January invoice of $33,232.50. Perkins and Will's January invoice of $96,007.20, and unanimously approved payment for both.
Okay, any questions on that? All right. I guess, Nate, I think we're open for public comment.
Yes, you said there was someone.
So there are some people in the, there are a few attendees. And if anybody has a comment or question they want to make at this time, I would just ask them to raise their hands.
Well, they're not panelists. Can they actually?
Yeah, we can bring them in if they raise their hands, but I'm not seeing any hands going up. So I think we're gonna call that done.
Okay.
At 7:57.
And I would just remind you that on the agenda that had our future meetings, our next meeting is February 27th. And then you can see the rest of the meetings. Rick, any last minute comments or anything to add?
I'm all set. Thank you, Nate.
Margaret, Brooke, anything?
All done.
All right.
And also, thank you. This was a huge amount of content again. Best attendance ever. Thank you so much. It really helps to have everybody seeing the same information. Thank you. Thank you.
Indeed. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay. Any questions? Don't people want to stay? No one wants to stay? All right. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Great work.
Good night.